Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Today, I am pleased to moderate this plenary featuring students from across the CSU. To begin, I will introduce our speakers. Kristen Pinchbeck McVaugh, she, her, is currently a graduate student at Cal State Fullerton studying sociology. She works as a graduate assistant in diversity, equity, and inclusion for ASI at Cal State Fullerton. In spring of 2022, she co-authored a book chapter titled Empathy-Minded Practice in Higher Education, the LGBTQ+ Experience, as part of a larger anthology titled Achieving Empathy in Higher Education Using Empathy as a Guiding Practice. She is currently working on a cross-generational study of lesbian coming out stories. In her free time, she enjoys working out, reading, and spending time with her wife. Morgan Beatty, she, her, is currently a graduate student at California State University, Sacramento, studying higher educational leadership. She currently works as a graduate assistant for the Women's Resource Center at Sacramento State. During the summer, she completed a research apprenticeship at the Sacramento County Office of Education through the Pathways Fellows Program. Her research interests include examining the low graduation rates for Black students in higher education. She enjoys outdoor activities and reading during her free time. Ben Nehring, he, him, his, is currently a graduate student in the history department at Fresno State. During his undergrad, Ben worked at Fresno State's Cross-Cultural and Gender Center to provide educational and community building opportunities and events surrounding the campus's LGBTQ+ community. He continues to seek out opportunities where he can advocate and uplift transgender people and their voices both on and off campus. Jordan Fitzpatrick, he is a blind, non-binary graduate student in the social work department at Fresno State. He is an intern in the counseling center on campus. They're an activist and advocate for the transgender and disabled communities, both on and off campus. He has assisted with research on housing barriers for the LGBTQ+ community in Fresno, barriers to accessing healthcare for the transgender community of Fresno, and is currently researching barriers to accessing mental health care for the transgender community of Fresno for his thesis. So with that being said, we will have 15 minutes for the end of the session for questions and answers. Please submit your questions using the Q&A box and we will do our best to answer them. And now let's begin with the plenary. So question number one is, gender affirming care is defined by the World Health Organization as a range of social, psychological, behavioral, and medical interventions designed to support and affirm an individual's gender identity when it conflicts with the gender they were assigned at birth. What does gender affirming care look like to you? What can it look like on college campuses? And why is it important that campuses practice it?
So I'll go first to answer this question. So I actually full-heartedly agree with whose definition. The only thing is, like, every individual's gender identity and their journey in this gender affirming care looks different. So, like, my gender affirming care journey is going to look vastly different from another trans person. So definitely an aspect of gender affirming care is listening to the person that needs that care. What does their care look like? So what can college campuses do? It's knowing resources, because a lot of the times, like, okay, college campuses, as, let's say, a social part of transitioning for transgender people, the college campus itself is not going to be able to help you change your name legally. But if they know who can in the community and they can send them to those people, that's very helpful. especially because for me as an undergraduate, not so much as a graduate student anymore, but as an undergraduate, I was on campus like full time. I was a full-time student. I'm on campus all the time. Campus is basically my entire community. It's the only thing I'm really doing. And so if I need to find something, campus is where I'm going to go first, because that's already where I am. And so it's, even if they don't have the resource for me, if they're able to tell me where I can find the resource off campus, it was very helpful. Because and I know at Fresno State we just started a gender affirming care. We hired a endocrinologist to be on campus for HRT, or hormone replacement therapy, and that's very helpful because in the Central Valley there is one there's one person that does HRT in the Central Valley. And so the fact that we now have another person is absolutely, even if it's just limited to campus, is absolutely huge, because now, campus students don't have to wait the 6 months to be on her wait list, or, pay astronomical out of pocket prices to see an endocrinologist at like a private care center or something like that. So yeah, I think that's my answer to the question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that also. I also go to Fresno State, and they they did recently add the gender affirming care, but it was a fight to get that. And for a long time, in these meetings where we were advocating for it, the people that worked at the center kept saying like, oh, we care about all of our students, we want to serve all of our students, but didn't actually want to do the work. So a lot of times, when we're in these meetings advocating for things, we hear administrators or faculty say these things that don't really mean anything, like we care about all students, or we want to support all students, or all students matter here, but then they don't actually have actions that reflect that, and it feels very hollow. And yeah. So I feel like there is more to gender affirming care than just hormones and surgeries. And again, like you were saying, everyone's transition is different, and it doesn't always include that, and that doesn't make their transition more or less valid, but also, like, especially on a campus, gender affirming care means supporting and actually caring about all students, and also making sure that the environment is equitable and safe, and affirming, yeah, not just making sure that there's access to hormones or name change resources, but also like making sure the campus is equitable and safe for the trans community as well.
If anything, I want to add something as well. Jordan, I really do agree with your statements, because I think, I think in the CSU, we are very, we move forward and we're very progressive, but at the same time, we need to have, faculty that does also, meet students where they are. And, being there and, giving them that comfortable space in these classes, because, even, simple things just as, stating pronouns can be important. I think that goes a long way to make sure that, you feel comfortable to share, your own, how you want to be defined, but at the same time, providing these resources on campus is really important as well. I think a lot of people may not know about it. So I think outreach is especially important in college campuses, to letting them know that they're not alone. And also it just provides visibility, and it also gives the opportunity for others to know about these resources, and to know that, for example, at CSUB or CSU Bakersfield, there is that resource for these students, kind of like a safe haven. But Is there anyone else, Kristen or Morgan, you guys would like to add anything?
I think Ben and Jordan really covered it super well. They both said everything that I was thinking of. So I think I'm okay, unless Morgan has something to add.
I would also agree that Ben and Jordan very much so covered this topic very well. I just wanted to add that a really important key component to student success is making sure that students sense of belonging, making sure that they feel like they belong on campus. And Ben and Jordan covered that really well.
Absolutely. So the next question I have now is, so reflect on the language used to describe LGBTQ2S plus students. What are some assumptions about the experiences of LGBTQ2S plus students in the CSU? Importantly, what are we missing in our understanding of their experiences that would help us better support them? So let's go ahead and start with Jordan.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have an intersectional approach to helping students and thinking about, how there's more to a person's identity than just being a member of the LGBTQ community. Like, for instance, I'm blind, there's people of color, and so making sure that your needs and your sense of belonging is there for all of those identities. There's not a lot of we have disabled student services office on Fresno State campus, but our campus in it of itself is not fully accessible, and there's issues like that. And when you go to advocate for things like that, you don't always feel like you're being heard, or that there's a lot of willingness to make changes, especially in a fast way. And yeah, I don't know if I fully answered the question, but those were the things that came to mind right away for me.
I'll add some things in here. I think in reflecting on this question, a big assumption that I found is that we are all a part of the CSU, which means we're in California. And so people think that there are no problems for the LGBTQ students in California. It's a liberal state. So people just think about that and they think, why do we even need one of these plenaries? Why are we talking about this? Because we're in California. And so, there's no homophobia here, there's no transphobia here, but we all in this group, and hopefully the people who are here with us today know that that is not true, and that there are still things that we definitely need to work on, even within the Cal State system. I did go to a private Christian school for my undergrad, so I can tell you the Cal States are way better. So I'm not saying that they're all bad. But I think even I've seen some of my professors get frustrated around a pronoun discussion and why is that even necessary? They don't understand why that's important to some students and why that could be really affirming to some students. And I think it's also really important to remember that our students are more connected to what's happening in the world than ever really before because of social media. And so we're not only seeing homophobia and transphobia happening to us in person on campus, but we're also seeing it around the world. We're seeing it when people make comments on our social media and things like that. So I think the rates of exposure to those things on social media and in person can make a student feel a little bit unsafe. And so I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as we're thinking about how we could better support students, just thinking about their holistic experience and being a little bit more gentle and having some more empathy so that the students aren't carrying all these burdens on their own. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So I think we can move on to the next question, which Many of the attendees today are here because they consider themselves to be allies and perhaps have been shouldering the responsibility of paying attention to supporting queer students. Work that is not shared is difficult to sustain. Having said that, how can allies engage others in the work of supporting LGBTQ students? Let's go ahead with Kristen.
So in my bio, Ignacio relayed that I worked on a book chapter about using empathy as a guiding practice for LGBTQ students to achieve better equity for students. And my research partner and I really reflected on it and thought about how we could best talk about how LGBTQ students need support, not only in resources, but just as people. So how can we support them by, yes, like getting them gender affirming care, having access to safe spaces, but also just feeling safe and feeling that sense of belonging that we've talked about a little bit so far today. And so we really hammered home this point of empathy. And a lot of people think empathy is like putting yourself directly in their shoes and feeling exactly what they're feeling. And so a lot of people who try to be allies think, oh, I can't do that because like, I don't know what the LGBTQ plus experience is. So like, I can't empathize with that. But what we really talked about is like, if you've ever felt really any emotion, like if you've ever felt grief or disappointment or shame or love or excitement, like then you can empathize with people because it's just really connecting to that like human experience. And so we talked about 5 empathy skills in our chapter that were adapted from Dr. Brene Brown's research. If you don't know her, you should know her. I'm obsessed with her. She's a social worker. She works in Texas. And so she has these 5 empathy skills. So the first one was perspective taking, which obviously is like seeing from another person's perspective. The second one is being non-judgmental. So just basically seeing their perspective and respecting that. The third one is understanding another person's feelings. So that's going back to what I was saying, like if you've ever felt a feeling, you can probably understand somebody else's feeling. And then the fourth one is communicating your understanding of those feelings. So saying like, I understand, I may not understand your exact experience at this moment, but like I can understand having that feeling. And then the fifth one is mindfulness. And that's just looking at your thoughts and being aware of them without like suppressing them or denying them, but also like not attaching yourself so much to them. And I don't know about everybody else, but I know I didn't learn these things growing up. Like this was not the culture in my family. This was not like any of that. So it's totally understandable that a lot of us in student affairs or just in life in general have to learn these things now. And so working on those 5 things, I think would be a huge help for the LGBTQ, for people who want to be allies for the community. And then also just doing what you can to learn about the community instead of saying like, I know what you need. Let me like get you these services. Let me get you this, let me get you that. And that may not be what they actually need. So listening, asking like, hey, how can I support you? Doing stuff like that is also really huge. And, learning what phrases matter to them, what things are important to them, that's going to make you a much better ally. And each community is different. So we have a lot of CSUs represented here. And I know each community on all of those campuses are going to have different needs and they're going to have specific things that they're working on. Like some of my fellow panelists have talked about how they just raised their pride flag, and at Fullerton, we've had ours for years now. So like we're all in different places. So we need to really listen to what the community needs. And then I think that is like one of the biggest key steps to being a good ally.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I feel like, it's important to recognize like it's okay if you don't know everything, like you were saying, and be willing to listen to the community too when they say like, what you're doing, I know maybe you didn't have a bad intention of doing that, but you should maybe try this differently, and you know, take in that criticism in a positive way, instead of like feeling attacked, and to make sure that, you know, especially when you're doing the work of working with LGBTQ students, making sure that it's not just like one or two people doing that work, but that everyone is doing something as well. Like I mentioned in my bio that I am an intern at the counseling center on campus, and they're trying to be more affirming in their care with the trans community. And I am the only out trans person working there. And I'm the only one that's been like pointing out like, hey, we need to make sure that like people's pronouns are right in their client profiles, and that they can change their name in their client profile. And they're all like, oh, we don't know how to do that. It's too complicated, and no one's really asked about it before. And well, so it's like, I've been putting it in on my end, but no one else is. And like, I put flags in my office, and at first people were like, what if people get upset about it? Or like, I've only had people feel more welcomed. And so sometimes like I feel like they say like, oh, we want to do these things, but then like it's one person doing the work, or like I feel like I'm on my own doing it, you know. So it really should be something that like everyone cares about and wants to do, instead of just like these hollow things of like, oh yeah, we care about all students, but then not actually following through with it.
This is amazing. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what both of you have stated. I think, you know, it's really, you know, I think great that, you know, being part of the CSU, we're able to have the liberty to, you know, create change, but at the same time, it's really difficult when you're that one person making that change. And you know, making you know, it's good to be uncomfortable and letting people know that, you know, we need to grow, and letting them know about the reality of these issues. Because frankly enough, like, you know, it may not just be one student who, you know, doesn't feel comfortable. It can be hundreds of students in our campuses, and doing those things, you know, gives them, you know, visibility. I mean, like, as Kristen, you brought up, some campuses have done, you know, pride flag risings. Here at CSUB, you know, we last year did it for the first time ever in our 50-year history. But you know, I think it sends a message to our students, letting them know that, you know, we are here to support them, we see them, and we're here for them essentially. But it also sends a message, you know, to the greater area of where we live, you know, that, you know, it's about time that we start to move forward and, you know, make it a friendlier environment where we let everyone feel visible. And I think those small things, even with our allies, goes a long way. Hearing us out and, you know, being there to support us, or even when they see something that is, you know, homophobic or transphobic, to call those people out, because, you know, there's a thing called a bystander effect. People will just, you know, let it swing by and be like, okay, you know, we'll let it slide. No, because you're just letting someone, you know, get a pass and continue that same action over and over again. And that's just frankly not acceptable. But thank you so much for sharing those perspectives. So the next question is, these past few years, we have seen an increased call for racial equity and anti-racist policies and practices in the CSU. To what extent is anti-racist work inclusive of work around homophobia and transphobia? And to what extent is racism addressed with queer activism? What would truly intersectional work look like in the CSU? Let's go ahead and start with Morgan.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we oftentimes talk about racism, sexuality, and gender as separate issues, and queer people of color exist. So therefore, it's impossible to speak about racism without involving or anti-racist policies without including queer activism. And to answer the question, I believe intersectional work in the CSU would address each aspect of a person's identity, and that includes faculty, staff, all of the campus community. And I think this would include involving people that identify as queer and people of color on these committees that discuss their identities. I think we oftentimes speak about students or faculty and staff that are part of these identities without including them in the topics and including them in the conversation. And I think that everyone deserves a seat at the table, especially when you're speaking about their experience.
I know for me, like, you know, I'm white. I can, as Krista talked about earlier, I can empathize, but I don't actually know the specifics of what queer people of color or just people of color who don't identify within the LGBTQIA community are going through. And so it's very much trying to bring those voices to the table. I know it at Fresno State, a lot of the times there, when I worked at the Cross Cultural and Gender Center, we had a lot of trans people of color coming through our space, but they were very, due to factors in their own lives, they were very reluctant to like actually, they were afraid to be seen at the table. And I think that also needs to be taken into account, that like, you know, some people, they have and this also goes for white people, white queer people as well, but I've seen it more in with queer people of color. But like, you know, like sometimes culture or religion will get in the way, and they don't want to be seen at the table. And so it's also just like making sure that you are listening to them so that you can bring as much of their voice to the table, even if they can't physically be there. Also with intersectionality, I see a lot on Fresno's, well, I'm on the Fresno State campus, so I see it a lot on the Fresno State campus, but we're very siloed within higher ed. So it's like you have a queer event is going on, and so they only reach out to other queer groups on campus. And so now you have like, which is great. I mean, they should be included, but you know, like we should also be reaching out, like as if you're doing a queer event, you should be reaching out to like the Black African American groups on your campus, or the Latinx groups on your campus, or the ability groups on your campus, stuff like that, because there are LGBTQ people within those. And so, and vice versa, just like I feel like we need to become less siloed. That would really work, because within, and I know it's an organizational thing, like it's when you make the organization, it's like, okay, we are representing queer people, but we got to keep in mind that like people themselves are not siloed. And so getting that interdepartmental work going, I think would also be extremely beneficial to doing more intersectional work on campuses. So.
I think just to piggyback off Ben just a little bit, I was going to say exactly everything that he said about the siloing. I see that on my campus too. So it's definitely not just a Fresno State thing. It's, I think, just a higher ed thing. Our departments like literally don't talk to each other. And so we never know who's doing what event. And so I've been working really hard this year to try and reach out to the different community groups and see if we can all kind of like create groups or events together. And it's really hard because everybody just does their own programming and stays like, I'm just over here, this is my room, this is my safe space, this is where I do my event. And which I totally understand, like also needing your safe space and needing that to be a place where you can feel safe and feel like it's your event. But I definitely see that too. And I think you know, if we look at LGBTQ history also, while it has been a very exclusionary place, it's been a very white space. We've had a lot of our pioneers were not white cisgendered people. You know, we have a lot of pioneers that were trans people of color. And so we need to look to them and remember that that is how we are here today. Like that's a huge part of our history. That's a huge part of how we all have the rights and freedoms that we have today. And I think also there's this narrative within the United States that immigrants and people of color and Indigenous people are somehow more like homophobic and transphobic, which is not always true. Like if you look at Indigenous communities around the world, they are a lot more open to trans identities, to spirit identities, like all of that kind of expression. And so I think like they're often celebrated in those communities. And so I think we could learn from them. And just remember that, like, I think any kind of activism has to be like activism for everybody. Because like Ben was saying, like our identities are not siloed. Like we're not only queer people, and that's like literally all that we have going on in our life, because that is not true. And so we just need to remember, like any kind of activism work, when we're doing our LGBTQ work, it has to be anti-racist. It has to be like disability friendly. It has to be all these things, because that's how we're going to show people that like all of these identities do come together and they all matter just the same.
Thank you for that. So with the next question, let's talk about safety as queer students. What do you know about the process for reporting bias, discrimination, and harassment? And is there any training on your campuses about how to identify and report discrimination and harassment? If so, is it inclusive to LGBTQ2S plus identities? Let's go ahead and start with Kristen.
So I don't actually know what the process for reporting is. I know that we've taken so many Title IX trainings. We have to take them every year, especially if we work on campus. We usually have to take like 2 or 3. And I still don't really know what the process is. I think also those trainings don't really feel effective in teaching us how to report things. And they're not very inclusive trainings. At least that's been my experience. I recently had to take mine, and as we were preparing for this panel, I was paying attention so I could maybe say like how to report. And I know they said like you go to your Title IX officer and do those things, but it also, the trainings felt very heteronormative, white, able-bodied, like the actresses were all like thin and blonde. And so it really didn't feel very inclusive. And CSUF is a Hispanic serving institution. Like we have a huge Latinx population, a bigger Black student population. So looking at this training that was specifically like CSUF training on how to like manage sexism and harassment and all that kind of thing on Fullerton's campus, it felt like this doesn't really represent me. It doesn't represent my campus. And so I think that it would be, and I'm sure, I don't know the experience of other campuses, but I feel like these trainings are pretty like one size fits all. And so like one training fits all campuses, not like it doesn't fit all people. And so I think really looking at how we have these trainings, making them more accessible for people so that they feel like they're represented by the trainings, that they're actually giving us tools that we can use and that we know the proper steps to go. I know Larissa mentioned like even looking at your website and seeing like, is it inclusive of the trans experience? Is it inclusive of like all of these different things that fall under gender discrimination and harassment and sexual harassment and bias and all of those things? So I think, I don't know what that process is, but really like working on creating inclusive training materials for this could be a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Like, there's not really a lot of information that's readily available about how to report things and like how the Title IX process works. And the trainings that we watch, they really only focus on instances of sexual assault. It doesn't go into like if you've experienced any type of discrimination. like there's like I said, there's not a lot of information about resources. Like there's a victim advocate on our campus. We only have one for the entire campus, and that covers students and faculty, and she is constantly booked. Like there's not enough time for her to help everyone that comes to her for services. And I didn't even know that she was there, that we had a victim advocate, until I started working at the counseling center, because her office is there, and they were giving me a tour of the counseling center, and they were like, oh, and here's where our victim advocate is. And like I've been at Fresno State through my undergrad, and I'm in my last year of grad school, and I just found out about her this year. And as far as like reporting any type of like discrimination or unfair treatment in classes, I feel like it's really hard to report it, to get the courage to do it, because of the power imbalance being a student. And then, you know, if the discrimination or harassment you experience is from a faculty member, and I did experience some pretty bad like discrimination because of my disability, and some ableist language being used by a teacher. And I tried to talk to the chair of the department about it. And the department that I was a major of at the time was psychology. And the chair of the department didn't really like understand why what I experienced was a problem. And so from that experience, it kind of just taught me like, okay, if I experience anything like this again, like nothing's going to happen, so why even bother? Yeah, and other people that I've talked to on campus, like they don't know anything about like how we would go about reporting any type of assault or discrimination or anything like that. Like it's really, no one knows.
I know for me, it's also like the people being reported to. I can't speak for the Title IX office or victim advocate or survivor advocate, sorry. But like, so while I was working at the Cross Cultural and Gender Center, if you look up on the Fresno State website, we have a gender inclusive restroom map, and it marks out all where all the gender inclusive restrooms are on campus. And there's like a small note at the bottom that says like, if you face any harassment or like someone's not letting you use the gender inclusive restroom because for whatever reason, tell the Cross Cultural and Gender Center and like report it to us. We don't actually know what to do with that information, if we're being honest. We take the information and we're kind of like, okay, well, I guess we'll try and talk to the person if we know who's doing it. But like there's no, like, we kind of got put in charge of that, and we don't actually know, like, even the people being reported to sometimes don't know what to do, at least in this case. And so it's also very much like, and one of the things that I found that the reason it's so murky, especially surrounding LGBTQIA2S plus issues, is because there's no policy. There's no explicit policy around these issues. I did a project where I literally went through and read every single policy on the California, the Fresno State campus, which included all of the CSU policies. And basically the only thing that really explicitly protects this community is the general non-discrimination policy, which is great. I mean, that's obviously a great first step, but there's no other explicit policy that lets people know that they are protected and what to do. And because there's no explicit policy that lets us know how we're protected, how do we know that if something happens, how do we know who we're supposed to go to? Because we're not, but I'm having trouble describing what is not there, essentially, in that like it's not there, so we don't know what to do. And so I think a big thing about like not only having these trainings, like getting better trainings and figuring out, but also there needs to be the policy to back those trainings up. and we just, whoever is in charge of policy, I ended up leaving the CCGC before I got that far in the project. But like whoever's in charge of the policy, we need to get together and work on building better policies that better protect our students and our faculty and staff and all that stuff. Because I think that would very much lend itself to also just helping figure out who to report to and what to do in situations. So
I just wanted to chime in a little bit. So I went to 2 CSUs. I went to Sonoma State during my undergrad, and now I attend Sac State as a graduate student. And I think all of the training for Title IX is pretty similar. As Kristen said, it's online, and also with reporting bias, it's all online. And I just don't think that's accessible to all students, nor inclusive. And I just wanted to mention that some campuses do bystander intervention, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. I think shared governance is very important in higher education. So I think coming together as a whole, and like all campuses coming together to talk about how they acknowledge and address these issues can be very healthy in order to create a healthy campus climate for all students.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much for all of your insightful responses to the question. So now the next question is, these past few years, we have seen some important work by queer advocates to increase support for students. What are some of the most effective resources, policies, or practices for LGBTQ2S plus students on your campuses? What are some of the challenges around building awareness of these supports and connecting students with resources? Let's go ahead and start with Ben.
So I feel some of the most effective resources and stuff like that. I know recently, in the past 2 or 3 years, I think the entire CSU implemented a thing where we can students can go into their portals and change their preferred names and pronouns, which was absolutely revolutionary, sort of, because I remember when I started, I had to email each individual professor and be like, basically come out every semester. I am trans. This is what this means. These are like, this is what it says on my student stuff, but please do not like bring that up in class. This is what I need to be. And it was just an ongoing process. And just, I looked at the beginning of every semester with dread. And so the fact that this was finally something that I could just go into my student portal and change it. And it was just, I didn't have to talk to anybody. I mean, it was very nice. And that's just, so when it asked like, what are some effective resources or good ones, I was like, that one really impacted me personally. As so I really like that one. But going into the challenges of building awareness is that like a lot of the times we implement these things, but then the people in charge of them on campus don't know that these are even being provided. I mean, like I said, we implemented this. You can go in and change your preferred name and pronouns on the portal, but not everybody knows that that's available. One big thing that I ran into a lot is so at Fresno State, you are able to put your preferred name on your student ID card. And so you just are the process is that you go into the Bulldog card office, because we're Bulldogs, but you go into the Bulldog ID card office and basically say like, I would like to put my preferred name on the card, and it's supposed to be free of charge. However, the amount of trans people that or people with just preferred names who aren't trans as well go into the office and are like, this is what I need. And the Bulldog card office is like, I have no clue what you're talking about. I didn't even know this was. And so the amount of times that I like me or one of my coworkers or something have had to call the Bulldog card office and basically train them their own to do their like how to even do their own job, even though I'm in a completely separate like place on campus, but I'm like, I know at least this aspect of their job apparently better. Not that I know anything else they do, but I know this part. But it's like the people that are helping, in some cases, the people that are helping implement these don't even know that they are implementable. And so I feel like training for, I feel like, well, we were kind of talking the previous question, how trainings aren't always effective, but like just some, we need to get it out there that these resources are available, and that like the people who are giving the resources need to know that they're able to give these resources. And so honestly, it's just like, to be more effective, I guess, sharing the information, because yeah, some people, they just don't know it's there. And I feel like that's one of the biggest detriments. Because the policies we do have are great. But nobody can utilize them. And so we don't have the numbers because nobody's utilizing these resources because they don't know they're there. So we don't have numbers to fight for better resources and policies later. And so I think honestly, just sharing, scream it from the rooftops if you have to. But yeah, just, okay, I'm gonna stop talking now, sorry.
Yeah, I agree. Like there's just making sure that everyone knows about what's available, and if not that, then at the very least knowing who they can refer people to for help. And yeah, there's just so much more that needs to be done, but I feel like I've been repeating myself a lot.
No worries. I think everyone has an open space to talk about, all of this, and it's a fruitful discussion. And before let's get to our last question, I want to let attendees know that we still, if you still want to ask a question in the Q&A box, you have the opportunity to do that. But with that being said, we will move on to our last question. Many of our attendees today believe that campuses need to leverage the expertise of its students. Having said that, how can faculty and staff leaders make CSU campuses a place to thrive for LGBTQ2S plus students? Let's go ahead and start with Kristen.
So I think, like I mentioned before, and like a lot of us have already mentioned today, really asking the students how they feel best supported, asking them what they actually need from campus leaders and staff and faculty, so that they feel like they can thrive, is a big one. That's a huge first step, I think. And then I think also, going back to our ally discussion, really taking a look and being mindful, look at your programming and services and identify the gaps in those and work to fill them. And like Ben was saying, we have great programming and services on our campuses that a lot of us don't even know about. Like I was recently at the health center for a sinus infection, just like a regular appointment, and I saw that there was they had like a flyer for a support group that was for LGBTQIA students in like their coming out journey and just like general support. I literally would have never even heard of that if I hadn't been just randomly at the doctor in that specific office that day too, because each room has different flyers. So, identify those gaps and fill them. So they're working on that part, but then also like figure out how to reach the community. And I think, like we've also already talked about, working to not only recognize the LGBTQ plus campus on community, or community on campus as like our LGBTQ student groups, because we all have those, but then also recognizing the LGBTQ students in other student groups that may not feel super comfortable being a part of the LGBTQ group, because that definitely happens. And then working to create safe spaces so that we can have these conversations and so that we can talk about how students can thrive. I think there are other things we could do, like faculty development workshops. We have a lot of those on our campus. I don't know about other ones, but you also have to be looking for them and know that they're there so that you can, learn better ways to support students. Like, I think I learned about the fact that we can change our name and pronouns in one of those workshops. And as a student, I didn't even know that. So like what Ben was saying, I think working to make these things more accessible, and like having specialized health services for LGBTQ students, like all these things that we've previously mentioned today, I think would make our campuses spaces where we could feel like we can really thrive.
Yeah, I recently looked at the website for another campus to see what their like gender affirming care services look like and what kind of resources they have, and it really made me realize like how different each campus is and like how much is available and how like just how many resources different campuses have compared to others. Like I feel like there isn't very much on our campus, but then on other campuses there's like a ton of things, and there it feels like there's a lot more support, and it seems just even just looking at the website like it's a more affirming place. And so like maybe if there's some way that like all of the campuses can like come together and make it more uniform, like, hey, this is what we have, this is what we did, and making it so like all of the campuses have the same level of resources and support is something that came to mind to me the other day. And yeah, also making sure that the campus is a welcoming and safe place for all students. Yeah.
So I guess first off, just like ditto to everything Kristen and Jordan have said, and I'm pretty sure ditto to whatever Morgan will say if she wants to say something. Like just great things all around. But the big thing for me is like kind of what Kristen said, not only ask but listen to the students. What do they need? And another big thing in my classes right now, it's really interesting as a history grad student, we've gotten on the topic quite often of what exactly makes an expert. In higher ed, we're considered experts. We're training to be experts. We are experts in this field. And it's like, but at the same time, in my opinion, you can only be an expert in like the highest level expert you can be in your own experience. So know that there is still like even me who like I am trans, I'm an expert in my trans experience. I know a bit about the trans community because I am part of it, but there's still stuff I can learn. I know like there's things all of my fellow panelists have said today that like have made me sit back and it's like, okay, I haven't thought about it that way. I got like this is an area I can learn more, I can grow in. And so just also being open to the fact that you don't know you do know some things. Sorry, I almost said you don't know anything, but you do know some things. But you don't know everything is what I meant to say. And that's okay. I feel like a lot of the people that I work with is like, for me, I try to give a lot of people grace. I know nobody can know everything. But as long as you're trying to learn more, I think that's great. And so I think that's one thing that we can all do is just listen, learn, and be open to learning more, even as we continue to gain more expertise. So.
I agree with everything all of my fellow panelists said. And I just wanted to acknowledge the work that all campuses are doing already. I just think 20 years back, we did not have these policies or initiatives in place. So I feel that we're very privileged in our generation to see these happening because queer people 20 years ago did not have the privileges that we have now. And I think it's important to amplify the voices of queer students and faculty and staff and create space for their voices to be amplified. I think it's important to be intentional with all of these DEI trainings that are in place. And I think when we talk about this, I think about racial battle fatigue. So like, I think it's important to not leave all of the work to our queer faculty and staff, our queer students, and to be intentional with allyship.
Thank you. I really want to add as well, I think going back to what Morgan said, I think we're very fortunate to, be in a place, in a setting that, gives us a privilege to be who we are and to be very free about it. But there's still much work to be done. We really have to stress the idea that, there's still a need to address, representation and visibility. We still need to have a more open, discussion about, how do we increase numbers that, increase faculty that, identify as part of the LGBT community and also who are people of color, because I think with that, it makes the school and the classroom environment just more easier to discuss. And also, I think another way to be an ally is also, just hearing us out. Sometimes, we may have difficult times or we may feel uncomfortable. And we just need someone to hear us. And I know, sometimes our faculty are not licensed therapists or counselors, but just having someone to just, hear us out and understand us or be conscious of what we're going through as students, I think is just very important. And it's just, lending that ear, I think goes a long way, especially when helping, our LGBT, friends and family. So we do have a question on the Q&A box. So, the first one I want to ask is, how do each of you feel best supported on your campus? Can you tell a story about when you were heard and what difference it made for you?
I personally, it wasn't even like someone in the administration. It was like faculty members, specifically in the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program, that really made space to listen to me and other classmates when we were going through hard things, and just made us feel less alone, and kind of gave us more information about what we can do, but also like helped us realize, like, yeah, there isn't a lot of support, but I'm here to listen, and that meant a lot, like, at the very least. Yeah.
I know for me, there was I guess my story is kind of more of a big gesture kind of thing. Which, I mean, you don't have to always do big gestures to make somebody feel heard, as Jordan's example. But a little backstory on me: I do not have a very supportive family. So my family life is strained, to put it mildly. So when I was going through, legally changing my name and gender, it was kind of like I had me and my girlfriend, and that was about it. Just hyping, and I mean, it felt hyped, but I just also, like, I felt so alone. And I remember the day after I got the paperwork from the judge that said, you are now legally Ben Nehring, and you are legally recognized as a man. My coworkers on campus threw a gender reveal party, and I just it meant a lot, that there were other people. And I remember I'm not a big, like, I remember walking into one of my I was so excited. I walked into one of my professor's offices and was like, I know that we have like a professional relationship, but I need to tell you this because, like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And she was just like, oh, that's great. Okay. I don't know what to do, but I'm happy for you. And I was like, yes, that's all I needed. Okay, bye. I gotta go to class, sort of thing. And it's just like the big support, but also small support. Like I said, my story is kind of a big gesture, but even the small things it was yeah, that's something. So for me, at least.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on a little bit. So I've been at Sac State for 2 years and in my grad program, and I have the privilege of having a connection with our Vice President of Student Affairs. And I think that it's really amazing that he takes the time, his name is Dr. Ed Mills, he takes the time to listen to students and really wants to help advocate for our needs. So I think it's really amazing that I have that privilege, and I also have that privilege at Sonoma State as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge the administration that does take the time to listen to our students, because their workload's really a lot.
Thank you all for that. If I
was
can
gonna
add
to. Oh, you can go. You can go, and then I'll go.
Okay. I just wanted to give a brief, I think for me, something that it didn't happen in CSUB, but it happened when I was in my K-12 education as well. You know, we were in class, and one of my fellow students, I think openly called me out that of course I was gay, and I didn't take it too much offense, because I think we were just, in a open environment, and we were good friends. But my professor, not professor, my teacher, she called him out and said, hey, like that's not appropriate, and apologized to him. And so I think for me, it made me like realize like, wow, like, she knew about my story, and she knew that I didn't come from the most welcoming, home as a Latino. I think you can imagine sometimes, my parents came from a conservative background. So of course I wasn't the most supported in my family. And so my teacher knew all of that. And she really strained that, we need to make sure that even at school you feel safe. And so even something like that small gesture of saying, it's not okay to call people that, and asking that person to apologize to me, I think was really important. I was so young, but I knew that even now, and that I'm older, I'm like, that gesture goes such a long way. But Kristen, go.
Yeah, so my experience at the CSU has been very positive in feeling supported. Like I mentioned earlier, I came from a small private Christian university in Southern California. And I met my now wife there and came out during the time of being at that school. But it was not a place where we could be out on campus, like literally at all. Some people kind of figured it out because we were always like hanging out together. But it was not a place of any kind of support. I was a sociology major, so if I did come out to my professors, I know that there was support there and like with my friends in classes and stuff, but the campus community made it so uncomfortable that I didn't even feel like that was safe, because then what if they tell somebody else and they tell somebody else, it's like not a safe place. So coming to Cal State Fullerton was really like a culture shock, where I could be myself, and I could talk about my girlfriend or my now wife, and I can just say those things without really worrying about like what's going to be the repercussions for this. And I also got very lucky. My boss at work is also a lesbian, and so she really understands that experience, and so we can talk about things, even if it's just like, oh my gosh, she like rearranged the kitchen again and now I can't reach the glasses because I'm shorter. Like even those things, even just simple things like, oh, my wife's gonna be so mad at me. That's what she says all the time, not me. But like things like that. Just being able to be open about that and really talk about that, and feel like it's okay to just be myself. And that's helped me figure out a lot of even who myself is in the last year or so. And so I think, like Jordan was saying, it is a lot of small things. And those things add up.
Thank you so much for that. So with that being said, that concludes our discussion. So thank you again for joining us this morning and for your commitment to advancing equity for all students in the CSU. And thank you especially to my fellow students for sharing their experiences and expertise. We hope that you learn how you can support LGBTQS students from where you sit, and that you will take these ideas to share on your campuses.